Okay, so if we're talking about midpoint and we have 2 points, the exact halfway point would be the midpoint. And that would mean that this distance and this distance were the same. So if this was 5, this will be 5. Okay. And if we know, say, the coordinates of point A and B, we can find the coordinates of the midpoint. Okay. We had the formula for distance, which allows us, if we know the coordinates of 2 points, to find out how far apart they are. The midpoint formula allows us to find the coordinates of the point halfway between the middle. So we still have the points, and we call them x1, y1, and x2, y2. So you still need those 2 points. And then the midpoint formula will be x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And the reason we have this comma is because we're getting a point, right? We're getting the coordinates of the midpoint, so we need a coordinate pair. So we're solving for a new x and a new y. So this would be like x middle, y middle is what we're finding. Does that make sense? Okay. So to solve for these, we label them x1, y1, x2, y2, just the same as we did for the distance formula. Okay, so I have x1 plus x2, so negative 6 plus 1 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2, so 3 plus 0 divided by 2. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5, and 3 plus 0 is 3. And if they don't divide by 2, just leave them exactly as they are. Fractions are perfectly acceptable answers. So this will be the point that's exactly halfway between those 2 points. x1, y1, x2, y2, and then there's not really a letter that's accepted for midpoint, like universally. Some people put a capital M, like some books put a capital M, some write out the whole word. So I just split the difference and abbreviate it. So I have 5 plus negative 4 over 2, and then 12 plus 8 over 2. So this is going to give me 1 over 2 and 20 over 2. And 1/2 doesn't do anything, so I leave it. And 20 divided by 2 is 10. Okay. Coordinates of an end point. So what that means is if we have this line and we have a midpoint, we know this one and we know our midpoint, but we don't know the coordinates of the other end. And so we kind of have to work backwards from what we had just done. And there are 2 ways to go about this. There's the very algebraic way, using the x's and y's and solving the little equations, and then there's the, hey, look at this shortcut I figured out way. I'm going to show you both ways because one way may make more sense than the other for each of you, but you can use either way. Okay, so we're going to find the coordinates of J. Oh, that should say if. Okay, if K is a midpoint and L is the other end. Okay, so this is what we've got. We've got J, K, L. And we know K and we know L and we're missing J. Okay, that's the scenario that that sentence is describing. Now, we know that the midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And we know that the midpoint is k, so that's negative 1, 2. And if I call J x1, y1, and then L would be x2, y2. Oh, I lost my purple. Hold on. I would not know x1, but I would know x2. And I would not know y1, but I would know y2. Okay, so this is the algebraic way. I'm going through it the long way right now. Now this right here, if I were to know this point, would give me negative 1. And this right here would give me 2. Right? So if I knew what this point was, I added 3, I divide it by 2, and I would get negative 1 if I was finding the midpoint. But right now I have the midpoint, so I have to kind of work backwards. So what I do is I set this red equal to negative 1. So x1 plus 3 divided by 2 equals negative 1. And then I set this green equal to 2. So y1 plus negative 5 divided by 2 is equal to 2. Again, I'm doing the long algebraic way, and then I'll show you the shortcut way. So just bear with me for a sec. Okay. Now I need to solve each of these to find x1, y1. To solve this one, and multiply by 2, that cancels that denominator. So I have to do it to both sides. So I get x1 plus 3 is equal to negative 2. And then I subtract 3 from both sides, which gives me that x1 is equal to negative 5. Then I'll do the same thing on the other side. I multiply both sides by 2. These 2's will cancel. And I get y1 plus negative 5 is equal to 4. And I'll add 5 to both sides. And I'll get y1 is equal to 9. And so my point, J, would be negative 5, 9. Now that's the algebraic way to do it. That's what we're actually doing. Even when I show you my shortcut, we're doing all those same steps. It's just without the algebra thrown in, like without the letters. Okay. My shortcut way to do it is you take the end, or say you take the midpoint. Okay, my midpoint is negative 1, 2. Multiply it by 2. Okay, so I'm going to take that negative 1, 2, and I'm going to multiply by 2, which is going to give me negative 2, 4. Okay, so far following me? And then the last step is to subtract the endpoint. So I've got to subtract the point 3, negative 5. Now if I'm subtracting, that means I bring in this negative, so that turns this 3 into a negative and this 5 into a positive. because when you subtract things, you change the sign. You subtract the endpoint from the midpoint after you've multiplied by 2. So I have -2 minus 3, so that gives me a -5, and I have 4 plus 5, and that gives me a 9. We just did the exact same steps, right? I multiplied by 2, then subtracted. I multiplied by 2, and then I added, but adding was the opposite, so it's the same steps, but without the algebra. So if the algebra makes more sense, you do the algebra. If the shortcut makes more sense, then do the shortcut, because they're the same. It's presented differently, and so it might look more, or it just might click better one way or the other. Okay, so algebra, and this is shortcut. And as far as I know, I came up with this myself. I don't know if somebody else also came up with it, but it might happen. There's only so many original ideas in the world. Okay, so x1. Oh, wait, p is the midpoint. Yeah, y1. P is the midpoint, so mid. And I'm looking for g, which is the other end. So I'm going to call that x2, y2. So I have the formula right here, so I'm not going to rewrite it. But I have the midpoint, which is -510, is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay. So this goes with that. And this goes with that. -8 plus x2 divided by 2 is equal to -5. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. These 2's will cancel. So -8 plus x2 is equal to -5. I'll add 8 to both sides to get those to cancel. x2 is going to be 3. And then when I go do my y's, I have 6 plus y2 divided by 2 is equal to 10. Multiply both sides by 2, those 2's cancel. 6 plus y2 is equal to 20. Subtract 6, those cancel. And I get that y2 is equal to 14. And so my point G is going to be 314. Now using the other method, P is still the midpoint. Here? Here. You're right, I did. Good catch. Thank you. That's wrong. I multiplied by 2, but then I didn't multiply by 2. That should be 10. So when I add 8 to both sides, it should be -2, not +3. So sorry about that. See, everything makes mistakes. Even if you've been doing it for as long as I have, which is, like 2-3 years. Okay, so we're going to do the shortcut on this method. We have a midpoint, and this is an endpoint. Okay, so I'm going to take my midpoint, and I'm going to multiply it by 2. And that's going to give me -2, 6. So multiply both by 2. And then I'm going to subtract the endpoint. minus 5 minus 6. So negative 2 minus 5 is negative 7, and 6 minus 6 is 0. Questions at all on that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because we know Q is the midpoint, okay, what that tells me is that this length is the same as this length. Okay, so Q being a midpoint tells me to put an equal sign in between these two sides. So I'm trying to find the measure of PQ, so I want to know this length right here. And in order to know that length, I have to solve for y. So I set 9y minus 2 is equal to 14 plus 5y. So the two sides will be equal. I'm going to subtract 5y from both sides. And I get 4y minus 2 is equal to 14. Add 2 to both sides. 4y is equal to 16. Divide by 4. And you get that y is equal to 4. But you can't stop here, because it didn't ask us find y. It asked us to find PQ. PQ is equal to 9y minus 2. I know that y is 4, so I plug the 4 in. So I get 36 minus 2, so PQ is equal to 34. And this is my final answer. So like in this example, they don't give us the picture, so we have to draw the picture and label it so that we make sure we set it up correctly. So I have XZ with y as a midpoint. XY is 2x minus 3. YZ is 27 minus 4x. And I'm trying to find YZ. Okay. Excuse me. So I set these two things equal to each other because it's midpoint. So 2x minus 3 is equal to 27 minus 4x. So I'm going to add 4x to both sides. And I get 6x minus 3 is equal to 27. I'm going to add 3 to both sides to get that 6x is equal to 30. And then I'll divide by 6. And I'll get that x is equal to 5. Okay, so that was the first part. I found x, but I want to find yz. So for the second part, yz is 27 minus 4x. So that's 27 minus 4 times 5. So that's 27 minus 20. So yz is equal to 7. And that's really my final answer. Hypothetically, let's just say, what if it asked us to find xz? Okay, there's two ways you can go about that. You can add all of this together, and that's the whole thing. So I can do 2x minus 3 plus 27 minus 4x, and then plug in x. Or I can find one side and then multiply by 2, because these are even, right? It's a midpoint, so these two sides are the same. So once I know that this half over here is 7, that means this half over here is 7, which means the whole thing is 14. So if you're asked to find the whole length, you can either add together or just find one side and multiply it by 2. Whichever one makes more sense or seems easier. That make sense? Okay. So array is a part of a line. Basically, if you take a line which is infinite in 2 directions and you just chop half of it off and get rid of it. It has an end point. Here's the end point right here. Oops, wrong color. The end point. And then it continues forever in one direction. Now you name array, and the location, when you named a line or line segment, remember how I said the location of the letter doesn't matter? But when you name array, the locations of the letters do matter. See how there's no arrow on this side? The side with no arrow has to be the endpoint side. So you could call this XY, or you could call it YX, but then you'd have to make your arrow go that way. Because the no arrow matches the endpoint. So, okay, you can't call this YX and have the arrow point to the right. Does that make sense? So just remember that the side of the ray with no arrow has to match to the endpoint. Okay. And that matters in these. Then you have opposite rays, and if you have 2 rays that form a line, they're called opposite rays. So pretty much any line, if you have 3 points on it, you can say there's 2 opposite rays. So KJ and KL are opposite rays. And they'll make a straight line, so they're collinear. If you have 2 non-collinear, so they don't make a straight line, that's when you get an angle. And so we have an angle here. And there are 3 ways to name this angle. Actually, there's 4 ways to name this angle. I can call this angle A. I can call this angle 2. I can call this angle BAC, or I can call this angle CAB. If you're using all 3 letters, this has to be the vertex in the center. Okay. The sides are the 2 rays, so my sides on this angle are AB and AC. The vertex is right here, at the point of the angle. Interior is right here, inside, in between the 2 rays. And then exterior is here and here, outside. So you can think of interior as between, and then exterior is just on outside.